back on track, and we want to update you on how things are going, but also we want this to be a chance for you, if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, if you're interested in the youth or kids programs, we would love to hear feedback from you. Maybe you could ask some questions. Maybe you could give a little input into what it is you're looking for in a youth minister or in a youth ministry search or in a youth ministry program. I know that when we did the roundtable this last summer, that was one of the main things that people were asking about. Hey, are we going to get a chance to have a little bit of say-so, or at least ask some questions or something like that about the student ministers? So we are doing that this Thursday. So this Thursday night, 6:30 in the fellowship hall down there. We'll have some snacks. Obviously, we're not going to do like a full meal, but we'll have some snacks, some dessert type stuff. So please come. It'll be a good time of fellowship and a good discussion, I hope. So with that said, we are starting a new series this week. If you have a Bible, and I hope that you do, we'll be in Psalm 74, and then we'll also skip over to Psalm 89. But Psalm 74 to start. While you're flipping there, I just want to tell you a little bit about it. Around this time of year, people are thinking about spirits, demons, angels. A lot of times that comes about in churches because of Halloween. Everybody's trick-or-treating, everybody's dressing up. And, with Halloween comes a lot of the thoughts about spirituality and, like I said, demons and Satan and all of that fun stuff. So I thought, why not have a series where we're talking about, from a biblical perspective, the unseen realm. So the Bible and the biblical authors, really all of them, I think, have a supernatural worldview, something you might call a supernatural worldview. And by that, we simply mean that the biblical authors are often writing and they're presupposing that there is something greater going on than just what you can physically see. I'll give some examples of that as we go on today, but this worldview, this idea that things are happening that we can't necessarily see, that there's something greater than us out there, and perhaps many more greater than us out there as far as demons and angels and so forth, that idea permeates the pages of Scripture, and it drastically influences what they're writing. It drastically influences how the biblical authors think about the world. And so for us as Christians, if we're going to try to have the same worldview, perhaps, as the biblical authors, we need to have some sort of grasp on what we might call the unseen realm. And this unseen realm, by the way, for the biblical authors, it's not just something that is kind of out there. It's not an abstract idea necessarily. The unseen realm for the biblical authors often affects things that happen in the world that we see. So it's not just that there's this unseen realm for the biblical authors where things are happening. It's that these things that are happening in the unseen realm can oftentimes affect things that are happening here on earth in the what we might call the physical or the seen realm. And so in this series, we will take a look at things like Satan and demons and angels. There's a lot to say. There's some misconceptions. Sometimes people can make the Bible into sort of a cartoon, but then also times there's people who can try to explain away certain things that are in the Bible that maybe aren't as comfortable for modern people. So we're going to try our best to give an objective, though it's always impossible to give a completely objective, but we're going to try our best to give an objective look at this. Also, what we're going to look at, and we're going to look at this a little bit today, is that even Christ's death, so we consider the cross to be the center of our faith often. We remember Jesus' death every single week in communion, and so it's important that the New Testament, and even a little bit of the Old, which we'll see here in Genesis 3 in a while, the New Testament frames Jesus' death and resurrection in terms of a cosmic battle. So if somebody asks you, why did Jesus come to earth? You can, in your head there, while you're sitting there, give maybe your answer. What would you say if somebody asked you, why does Jesus come to earth? Well, you probably have some right answers to give, but would you give the same answers that, say, the apostles give? Because John, for instance, as we're going to look at, and we've referenced this before, he says that Christ came and was revealed to destroy the works of the devil. So even when John, the apostle, is talking about Jesus' coming to earth, the incarnation, his death, his resurrection, he is framing such things within this cosmic worldview paradigm that we've been discussing. So we need to take a look at that a little bit today as well. And then also we will see how these truths affect us today, basically. How can these things that we're talking about practically impact our lives? And also, how can they impact our theology, the way that we think about God and the way that we think about the world? So that's what we're going to do. And also, the last part there, how does it affect the way that we view culture? See, that's also a big one because everybody's involved in culture in one way or another, whether it's your job or you're watching TV or you and your family, whatever it is, everybody is immersed in culture in some way. So how can viewing the unseen realm from a biblical perspective, how can that affect how we view culture, and how can that affect how we engage in culture? So those are all things we're going to look at in this series. The cosmic worldview of the world, the way to view the world as being this cosmic war that's basically eternal, was universally shared by ancient people. Now, this is an important point because we are going to look at some Old Testament text, specifically Psalms 74 and 89 today. And when we read those, you have to remember that when you're reading the Old Testament, you are also reading a very ancient document. It's not as though the Old Testament was insulated from the world around it. There are many passages in the Old Testament that we know are very similar to passages from other people groups, Egypt, Babylon, and so forth, in the ancient world. So we're going to read the Old Testament. We're going to read these couple of passages. And if you've never read them before, if you've never paid attention to this particular point, it's going to be a little different. And so we're going to talk about that. But what you need to know is that what you read in the Old Testament here in the Psalms about God and creation, specifically in these two texts, it was commonly shared in the ancient world. It was presupposed, dare we say. The ancient peoples all presupposed. There's really, you would be hard-pressed to find a culture or religion that did not take seriously the idea that there's something greater out there. That's one of the reasons why sacrifice was a universal inclination, why every ancient culture performed sacrifice. They thought that the sacrifice would in some way have an effect both on the physical realm, but mainly because it would affect the spiritual. It would satisfy a deity, or it would feed a certain deity, a god or a goddess. So ancient peoples thought that the spiritual world universally, not just, again, Israelites, but ancient peoples universally thought this way, that the ancient world was affected drastically by these unseen beings. Okay, Psalm 74. Start in verse 12 here, and we'll just go to verse 17. So Psalm 74:12, it says this. It says, "Yet God my King is from of old, working salvation in the earth. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, and you gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. You cut openings for springs and torrents. You dried up ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day, yours also the night. You established the luminaries in the sun. You have fixed all the bounds of the earth. You made summer and winter." So this is one of those times where I'm probably going to tell you something and it's going to sound a little different than what you heard growing up. Maybe, maybe not, but that's just my guess anyway. So when you read that, just off the top of your head, I want to ask you while you're sitting in your seat there, when it says that you divided the sea by your might and you broke the heads of the dragons in the water, and then you crushed the head of Leviathan, what do you think the author there of the psalm is getting at? And it's okay if you don't know, because this is very ancient imagery. And again, you read that in the modern day and you're like, what do you mean God crushed the heads of dragons? What do you mean that God crushed Leviathan. What's all this about the raging sea? Well, what you need to know is that in the ancient world, oftentimes a common way of viewing creation was that creation came about because a god or a goddess slayed another god or goddess and then creates the world out of their dead self. Now, again, that's kind of crazy for us to think about, but that's how a lot of times the ancient peoples viewed creation. It was a result of a battle between deities, and then the victorious deity would then create the rest of the world via the dead remains of this other goddess or god. Now, why is that important? Well, after verse 14, when the psalmist says, "You crushed the heads of Leviathan, and then you gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness," then what does he go on to say? He says, "You cut openings for springs and torrents. You dried up ever-flowing